The tricky business of peace, and it comes as the world remembers a successful but imperfect peace plan. 30 years ago, the Bosnian War finally came to an end. Under the leadership of the Clinton administration, leaders of Bosnia, Yugoslavia and Croatia came together in Dayton, Ohio to sign a landmark deal that put a stop to almost 4 years of that brutal war. It killed approximately 100,000 people, displaced hundreds of thousands more, and culminated in Europe's deadliest atrocity since World War II, the Srebrenica genocide. The Dayton Accords divided Bosnia into two autonomous entities patrolled by NATO peacekeepers. And while divisions remain, in the 3 decades that have passed, war has not broken out again. So how can this time-tested diplomacy inform war and conflict resolution today? Let's bring in 2 lead actors in this drama: Christopher Hill, former ambassador to Serbia under President Biden, and Carl Bildt, the former Swedish Prime Minister, who also was Bosnia's first post-war High Representative. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. And I can't think of 2 people more perfectly placed to discuss what's happening now and back then. So first to you, as former U.S. ambassador and deputy leader to Richard Holbrooke for Dayton. What do you make of the reports of how the Trump administration is considering ending the Ukraine war, which started with Russia's illegal invasion in 2022?
Well, it's certainly an unusual approach. First of all, what you try to do is you try to make sure you're having kind of equal time for different sides. And from what we understand, this has been very much an effort with Russia rather than with Ukraine. So, I mean, there were times in Bosnia where I would go off and see Milosevic, and the insistence, and it was correct, was I should then make my way to Sarajevo, never see one without the other. So that's one thing that's kind of odd. The second is that rather than go to 28 points, and again, I speak as someone who doesn't know the inside game on this, you usually try to start with some principles, start with some concepts, what the overall war aims are, and see if those can be met, and then you articulate principles into points. But these seem to be efforts to go right to the points. And again, you know, when you're out there trying to do something, you don't like people on TV to tell you you're not going to succeed. But I must say the odds are long.
So Carl Bildt, also as a European, it appears that the EU has not had a look in. Can you tell me what concerns you have and what you think about the prospects of, apparently, as far as we know, and as Chris Hill says, we don't know all the details yet, basically just hammering out this framework with the Russian side?
Well, we only have very sort of uncertain information via the media. That information hints at the U.S. negotiated accepting more or less all of the key Russian demands. So I think, as a matter of fact, this is going to go nowhere, because what is reported in the media, there's no way that's going to fly either with the Ukrainians or with the Europeans. And it affects the Europeans both directly and indirectly. So I think this is going to go nowhere.
Let me play for both of you a little bit of that kind of reaction from the EU's Foreign Affairs Chief, Kaja Kallas. Let's just play this.
Of course, for any plan to work, it needs Ukrainians and Europeans on board. So this is very clear. Also, we have to understand that in this war, there is one aggressor and one victim. So we haven't heard of any concessions on the Russian side.
So I just want to ask you both, and also from your experience, especially dealing with the Serbian Yugoslav leader Slobodan Milosevic, you know, to bring an end to the war in Bosnia. Chris Hill, what you know, in Dayton, you all had all the parties together. You brought them to Dayton, and it was hammered out with them. What are the perils of just not doing that in this case?
Well, I mean, the issue is in Dayton, it was essentially to hammer out the details of something called a contact group plan. There were no surprises really to anybody as to what the principles of getting together were. I mean, obviously, Dayton turned out to be a tough slog over those 3 weeks, but it was kind of clear what we were trying to accomplish. And so I have some concerns as to whether this plan could really get anywhere. As Carl has accurately pointed out, it didn't seem to have any of the input of the major players, the Europeans, nor of the Ukrainians. So I think it's the idea of bringing people together at this point over something that's really in a very kind of a stage where no one really knows what it's about, I think would be a terrible mistake.
So, Carl, obviously this has huge implications for Europe, right? I mean, this is a war fought in Europe. And for 4 years, Europeans, along with Ukrainians, have been trying to hold the line against further Russian threats. Particularly if it gets all its demands met on the Ukrainian battlefield. And you know, Ukrainian independence and sovereignty are also at stake. You have recently, and we spoke in the summer, went to Dayton for a 30th year anniversary of what you all accomplished back then. What did you come back with? What made you, remember what you all did in the hard slog of negotiations compared to what's happening, on this, around what doesn't seem to be a peace table regarding Russia-Ukraine?
I think two things should be pointed out. The first one is that prior to going to Dayton, we had a ceasefire. And that was not entirely easy to get, but it was absolutely essential to stop the guns firing before you had the leaders sit down and do the final agreement. So that should be the focus of attempts in Ukraine now, get a ceasefire, and then the politics after. The second is, as Chris pointed out, that prior to the 3 weeks at the Dayton, at the airbase there had been a process for X numbers of peace plans, and there had been agreement on some of the key parameters and principles of the deal that should be done. That didn't make it easy for the 3 weeks because the devil is often in the detail. But the key issues, the parameters of peace had been agreed in negotiation prior to that, and we had a ceasefire in place. Without that, it could never have worked.
And Chris Hill, as we know, and we'll just say it again, when President Trump called for a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, Ukraine immediately accepted it and Russia did not accept it and still hasn't accepted it. So that's one difference. But I also want to ask you, because I suppose realistically, there's going to have to be some give and take and maybe some territorial compromise by Ukraine, but would have to be negotiated. And the reason I ask you this is because I spoke to President Clinton, who led the Dayton Peace Accord process. I spoke to him a couple of years ago, and he mentioned some of the limitations in the final peace deal. Let's just listen to President Clinton.
We had a special problem in Bosnia because we couldn't make the peace without the Bosnian Serbs. And then from the beginning, either a hardline Serbian government or their Russian sponsors were always pushing for paralysis. They're still way better off than they were when they were slaughtering each other in massive numbers. But, I hope that'll be resolved someday.
Obviously, I was speaking to him actually in a perfect environment because you saw the two prime ministers of Britain and Ireland. It was about the anniversary of the Northern Ireland Good Friday Peace Accord. So they were talking about the hard slog of how you resolve these incredibly long and difficult wars. So take what President Clinton said, Ambassador Hill, that they had to deal with the recalcitrance and also the Russian influence against a peace deal, influencing the Serbs when it came to Bosnia. And it's very similar to what's happening now regarding Russia and Ukraine.
First of all, I just want to say on the issue of a ceasefire, the reason it worked in Dayton was everyone knew what the peace was going to be. And so the ceasefire came naturally as something you would do before you sat down because everyone knew where it was going and no one wants to be the last person to die in a war. So that worked. The problem here is no one really knows where we're heading on this. Bosnia, I think, had the added complexity of several sides, and of course, on the Serbian side, who could speak for the Serbs, and that's where we got a situation where Milosevic could speak for all the Serbs, including the Serbs in Bosnia. That may not sound ideal, but we really needed some one-stop shopping in terms of dealing with the Serbs, and so we were able to get that from Milosevic, not because we liked him, but because it made the difficult negotiation something that we could actually solve. But to President Clinton's point, there's no question we stopped a war that had gone on for years, had claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of civilians, and we stopped that. And at a certain point, the parties, and this goes up to today, are going to have to do a much better job of talking to each other and working things out together rather than tattletaling to the great powers. So I think we're at a phase now where they can talk, they should be able to talk together. I would say the Ukraine situation is far from that.